I'm Margaret Strecker. I'm the Director of the Compliance Section in the Division of Special Education. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was reauthorized and signed into law on December 3, 2004, and final federal regulations were published on August 14, 2006. After publication of the final federal regulations, the State of Missouri revised state regulations and the Compliance Program Review Standards and Indicators Manual and numerous model forms. This presentation, Special Education Administration, is one in a series of trainings to inform the field of the major changes in state and federal regulations and the implementing changes made in the Compliance Standards and Indicators Manual and the state model forms. We hope you enjoy this series of trainings and find the information useful in your role as an educator, parent, advocate, or other individual interested in the education of children with disabilities. Other topics in this series are discipline for children with disabilities, special education data collection and reporting overview, finance of special education, the special education process and changes in IDEA, the special education complaint process, and post-secondary transition. Resources and handouts for each of the presentation in this series can be found at the website that's shown on the screen. We encourage you to obtain the documents for this presentation prior to viewing. The Division of Special Education welcomes questions that participants may have after viewing the presentations. Questions can be submitted to the mailbox shown or by calling the Division of Special Education at 573-751-0699. The purpose of this presentation on Special Education Administration is to provide an overview of some of our responsibilities for monitoring and general supervision as the state education agency, and in turn to touch on how the requirements of IDEA related to compliance and student outcomes affect those of you who are in any way responsible for the administration of special education programs on the local level. One role of OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education Programs, is to ensure that the states are exercising general supervision responsibilities as required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. The State Education Agency, SEA, better known here as DESE, in turn must have systems in place to monitor and oversee school districts and other responsible public agencies as part of their responsibility for ensuring general supervision. This graphic is from the National Center for Special Education Accountability and Monitoring, known as NCLB, and is used to show the components of general supervision and how they all fit together to create a whole. It will probably become obvious to you as we cover these pieces of the puzzle how closely related they are to each other and sometimes how difficult it is to isolate them as separate entities. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is just one in a series of presentations related to changes in IDEA regulations and how they're implemented in Missouri. Some of the presentations will focus on the fiscal management and effective dispute resolution puzzle pieces, so I won't be covering those today, and while data is an important part of today's discussion, there will also be a separate session that will cover data in much more detail. So we will primarily focus today on the following puzzle pieces: State Performance Plan, Policies and Procedures and Effective Implementation, Integrated Monitoring Activities, Improvement, Correction, Incentives and Sanctions, and Targeted Technical Assistance and Professional Development. IDEA 2004 required each state to develop a State Performance Plan, or SPP, that covers 20 performance and compliance indicators established by OSEP. The SPP is a 6-year plan. Each year, the state agency is required to report to the U.S. Department of Education its progress on meeting the targets in the SPP through an annual performance report, or APR. Because the SPP and APR are so central to the process of general supervision and monitoring, it seems important to start with this piece of the puzzle. One of the handouts that was available for you to download for today's presentation was the OSEP Part B State Performance Plan Monitoring Priorities and Indicators, and along with that, the Missouri Part B State Performance Plan Targets, which outlines the targets set for 2005-2006 through 2010-2011. If you look at the indicators listed on the first handout I mentioned, you'll see performance or results indicators that target areas like graduation and dropout rates, participation and performance on state assessments, which is the MAP and MAP-A, rates of suspension expulsion, services in the least restrictive environment, parent involvement, etc. You'll also see some indicators that are more related to compliance, such as timelines for completing initial evaluations and evaluations of children coming to early childhood special education from First Steps, post-secondary transition goals and services, and correction of noncompliance. Whether the indicators are specifically related to student results or are related to compliance or perhaps timely and accurate data reporting, the entire SPP is designed with the purpose of ultimately improving results or outcomes for students with disabilities. When you look at the second handout that shows the targets for each indicator for each year, you will notice that some targets are 100% or 0%. OSEP has established these targets for all indicators that are compliance indicators. They expect states to achieve full compliance in those areas, whereas DESE has established the targets for the performance or results indicators. Those targets were established with input from stakeholders. You're going to hear about improvement planning during this presentation, and the SPP is really the division's improvement plan in that we have established targets for the state and have identified activities that we anticipate will enable the state to meet the targets. We are required to publicly report on an annual basis on state-level performance as well as district-level performance. It would be hard to talk about an effective system for general supervision and monitoring at the state or local level without considering the importance of the policies and practices and procedures that guide our work and what it takes to have effective implementation of those policies and those procedures. In addition, what are we doing and what are you doing in districts to evaluate whether policies and procedures are being implemented appropriately? The federal government issues statutes and regulations, IDEA, and from these, states develop their own state regulations. We also develop standards and indicators to give more specific guidance, and we publish a model local compliance plan that districts can adopt or revise as they choose. We not only need to be concerned with general supervision as it relates to IDEA, but those of us who are responsible for services for students with disabilities also need to be concerned with other overarching laws, such as No Child Left Behind. Remember that No Child Left Behind also requires a state plan and performance targets are established. Data is collected for all students, and adequate yearly progress data is assessed for all students and disaggregated for students with disabilities, as well as for other subgroups. Many students with disabilities benefit from Reading First initiatives that are part of No Child Left Behind, and No Child Left Behind also includes improvement and correction components. One of the major places in which IDEA and No Child Left Behind are now aligned is in the area of highly qualified teachers. There are a number of things that are extremely important for program administrators to know about highly qualified teacher requirements. However, because we covered this topic in detail in one of our other web stream presentations, the Special Education Process and Changes in IDEA, I'm not going to take time to repeat this information at this time. Please refer to that presentation and also to the State Plan for Part B of IDEA for guidance in this area. To refresh your memory, the puzzle piece we're concentrating on now is policies, procedures, and effective implementation. And I'll take just a moment to point out a couple of other policy areas it's important for you to be familiar with in addition to highly qualified teacher requirements. One of these areas falls under the terms NIMAS and NIMAC. NIMAS stands for National Instructional Materials Access Standard, and NIMAC refers to the National Instructional Materials Access Center. This new provision in IDEA 2004 is about giving children with blindness or other print disabilities access to instructional materials in a timely manner. The adoption of NIMAS is intended to improve the speed, quality, and consistency of instructional materials converted into a specialized format. Textbooks, workbooks, and other instructional materials can be provided in alternate formats such as Braille, audio, digital text, and large print. Districts must choose whether or not to coordinate with the National Instructional Materials Access Center, NIMAC, when purchasing print instructional materials. If a district chooses not to coordinate with the NIMAC, the district must provide an assurance to the state that they will provide instructional materials to blind persons or other persons with print disabilities in a timely manner. The web address shown will give the viewer more information on NIMAS, NIMAC, and other procedures to follow for obtaining accessible instructional materials for individuals with blindness or other print disabilities. I won't spend much time covering the area of private parochial services, since there are aspects of this that were covered in the special education process and funding web stream presentations included in this series. I'll primarily point out from an administrative point of view that it's very important to be aware of the requirement to consult with representatives of private schools in your district each year, and this should take place prior to making decisions about the use of your proportionate share funds for students parentally placed. Please refer to our website at the address shown above for sample forms and more information about district responsibilities related to private parochial schools. What do we mean when we say integrated monitoring activities? In many ways, the answer to this comes back to the interrelatedness of the general supervision puzzle pieces that we looked at earlier. First and foremost, monitoring activities should encompass both compliance with IDEA and performance results for students with disabilities throughout the state. IDEA 2004 emphasizes that monitoring activities should focus on two things. One, on improving educational results and functional outcomes for all children with disabilities, and two, ensuring compliance with Part B, with particular emphasis on those requirements that are most closely related to improving educational results for children with disabilities. In addition, multiple data sources and methods must be used to monitor every district every year. Does this mean it's necessary for DESE to conduct a comprehensive review of every district each year? Thankfully, no. However, data is reviewed and publicly reported each year, and certain SPP indicators such as 9 and 10 that cover disproportionality do require a review of data for all districts each year, with subsequent reviews for districts that are identified under the state's criteria for disproportionate racial and ethnic representation. Monitoring reviews may be conducted on-site or off-site, and focused monitoring on-site activities are geared toward identifying areas in which there can be improved performance as well as correcting noncompliance as appropriate. States are also moving toward maximizing the use of their monitoring resources to include effective professional development and targeted technical assistance activities. If you've been in the field of special education for a while, you might remember when Special Education School Improvement, which is now known as the Compliance Section, conducted on-site reviews for every district that had an MSIP review. That gradually changed along the way. Self-assessments came into play during the last cycle of MSIP, and DESE started doing fewer on-site reviews and more desk reviews to verify results of self-assessments. We even conducted some pilot-focused monitoring visits during the past 2 years of the last cycle that focused on performance issues, and we did start pointing out levels of performance in our monitoring and MSIP reports, but really the emphasis was still primarily on compliance. This chart shows a side-by-side comparison of a few of the areas that have changed most significantly as we've moved into the fourth five-year cycle of MSIP, which began with the 2006-2007 school year. These changes were made by DESE with a great deal of help from NICSEAM as well as several groups of stakeholders that provided input to us. In the past, reviews were primarily cyclical, and we've attempted to move toward a process of continuous review and improvement. So yes, we still do conduct cyclical reviews in conjunction with the MSIP cycle, but as mentioned earlier, there are aspects of monitoring that go on each year. We've also greatly decreased the number of reviews we conduct as on-site reviews, using the on-site process to focus on a small number of districts with the intent of comprehensively looking at one or both of our two focus areas selected in Missouri, which are post-secondary transition and elementary achievement. The focus in the past was mainly compliance, and the focus now is primarily on improvement in specific areas addressed by the SPP, with improvement planning now being a central theme in the process. In addition, our previous compliance monitoring data system has been replaced by a web-based interactive system called IMACS, Improvement Monitoring, Accountability, and Compliance System. IMACS is a newly developed system used by the DESE Special Education Division to monitor our general supervision activities with the districts. We're hoping the system will help us at DESE to do a better job of managing data related to general supervision, to generate letters, reports, and meaningful data for ourselves, for districts, stakeholders, etc., and to maintain back and forth communication between ourselves and districts. When your district is in the self-assessment year, which is the year prior to your MSIP review, you will now be using IMACS as a vehicle for conducting your self-assessment, addressing any corrective actions resulting from your review, as well as for completing any required improvement plans that may be a component of your self-assessment. If your district undergoes a special review, such as one that is related to disproportionate representation or discipline that are conducted annually, and you're required to complete a corrective action or improvement plan, you would also be using the IMACS system. It is also our intent for districts to have access to the system for voluntary use, including file reviews and improvement planning. I've mentioned two types of plans, corrective action plans and improvement plans, and I want to clarify the distinction between these two plans up front. Improvement plans start with an analysis of your district's data and a needs assessment that will lead to development of objectives and strategies to improve one or more areas of student performance, such as graduation rates, dropout rates, achievement on the MAP test, etc. Many of you are already familiar with the term CAP, or Corrective Action Plan, which refers to findings of noncompliance that resulted from a file review or possibly an on-site review. When systemic noncompliance with any of the Part B compliance standards and indicators is identified, the specific indicators are listed on a CAP, and districts are required to develop a plan for correction, which must be approved by the compliance section at DESE. OSEP requires that identified noncompliance be corrected within 12 months. DESE compliance staff conduct follow-ups which involve the review of documentation to confirm that the district has corrected each identified area of noncompliance. There will be other times that districts will complete improvement plans off-cycle for grant applications and for voluntary use. And also there could be times when a district may be required to complete a CAP in an off-cycle year, for example, for reviews of disproportionality and suspension expulsion. But the primary use we are talking about right now is in relation to your special education monitoring review connected with your status in the MSIP cycle. I've mentioned that monitoring now involves both the annual and cyclical process, and I'll take each of these and outline briefly what each process involves. In some ways, the cyclical process is similar to what districts have experienced in the last MSIP cycle. Districts are required to complete a self-assessment the year prior to their MSIP year, and this is true for charter schools as well as waiver districts that don't have an MSIP on-site review. In addition, there are necessary data pieces that we require you to submit. Corrective action plans may be required if systemic noncompliance is identified, and enforcement actions may be used if correction is not accomplished in 12 months. A couple of new components include improvement planning that's now an integral part of the self-assessment in the cyclical process, as well as a decrease in the number of on-site reviews and more of a focus on performance with those reviews. I'll cover each of these components of the cyclical process in more depth. One of the things we heard from stakeholders during our planning process for the fourth cycle monitoring was the need to reward districts that were doing well on performance. We took this seriously and designed the self-assessment process in such a way that it would, to a large extent, be focused on specific SPP performance indicators, and those were graduation rates, dropout rates, performance on the MAP, elementary achievement in communication arts, least restrictive environment, which is placement data, for grades K through 12, and rates of suspension expulsion. Thresholds were established for each of these areas, and if the district meets the established thresholds on any of the areas, they don't have to complete an improvement plan or file review in that area. On the other hand, if they don't meet the threshold, they do complete those activities, but only in relation to the specific area or areas that are not met. Training is provided to each district during the fall of their self-assessment year in order to provide information on the process they will be using for the self-assessment. What's covered in the self-assessment? Well, in addition to conducting a file review using compliance indicators that are related to not met SPP areas mentioned above, there are some pieces that all districts must submit. States are required to report annually to OSEP on the timelines for initial evaluations and First Steps Part C to ECSE Part B transition. You may have noticed those topics in the list of SPP indicators. This data is not available through any existing reporting mechanism, so we've decided the best thing we can do right now is to request that from each district during their self-assessment year. We also require that all districts complete a file review on SPP Indicator 13, which deals with post-secondary transition planning, regardless of performance on graduation and dropout rates. That is because this is an area we must report on in our annual performance reports, and our sample needs to include all districts at some time during the 5-year cycle. We've also chosen to require all districts to complete a file review on referral, review of existing data, and eligibility determinations in selected categories, simply because we're aware that this has been a problem area for many districts. The self-assessment process is now conducted using IMACS. Districts conduct their file reviews and enter their district data into the web-based system. During the summer between your self-assessment year and the year your district goes through MSIP, the compliance supervisors conduct a desk review looking at samples of documents the districts submit in order to verify the results of the district's review. We're working to simplify this process and require a smaller volume of documents from districts for this purpose. We also plan to offer more flexibility in how these files are sent to us, such as uploading, faxing, or mailing. We are working to get monitoring reports out to districts by the end of September during their MSIP year, and these reports outline any findings of noncompliance. Districts must correct individual child noncompliance where appropriate, and they're also required to complete a corrective action plan for systemic noncompliance identified. IMACS should help us and also help districts in managing these corrective actions, and the interactive capability of the system will allow us to collect documentation that verifies correction of noncompliance on an ongoing basis, helping to ensure the districts accomplish their corrections within the required 12-month deadline. Another component of the self-assessment is improvement planning, and this represents a significant change from previous monitoring cycles. As with file reviews, improvement planning is a mandatory process for districts completing their self-assessment if they did not meet the required thresholds on the SPP indicators I mentioned earlier. A scoring guide has been developed and is being refined this year to help us with evaluating the plans that are submitted as part of self-assessments and to provide guidance to districts that are writing these plans. The training that I mentioned that is conducted in the fall not only addresses the file review but also the improvement planning component of the self-assessment, and it provides guidance on the scoring guide as well as the process of analyzing your district's data and conducting a needs assessment based on that data. The RPDC Special Education Consultants are instrumental in helping districts work through this process. I'm not going to attempt to cover a lot of information about improvement plans, but will just mention the major elements in the plans. There are 5 steps in the full improvement plan process. The needs assessment is an analysis of your data to determine what needs to be worked on or what objectives you will select. Strategies are what types of systemic interventions you will select to improve the objectives you selected. In the resource component, you will need to determine what resources would be needed to implement the strategies in your plan and which resources are already available to the district. Only the first 3 of these are required for self-assessment districts who are not applying for grants. However, if your district is using the improvement plan to apply for a grant from the Division of Special Education, you will be required to develop a detailed budget to submit with the application through the IMACS system. The last area I'll be discussing related to the cyclical process is the on-site focused monitoring reviews. We are looking at going to approximately 10 districts in a school year for this focused monitoring on-site, which is a significantly lower number of districts than we have typically reviewed through on-sites in the past. Districts are selected through a data review process in which we look at data on graduation and dropout rates and map performance in the area of elementary achievement for districts within certain enrollment size groupings. We generally notify next year's MSEP districts of their status, on-site or desk review, in the late summer or early fall each year. We select a small number of districts for both our focus areas, post-secondary transition and elementary achievement, based on districts that appear to have the most need for improvement in those areas, taking into account trend data. We also attempt to take into account districts that MSIP plans to visit through on-site reviews and, where possible, to collaborate in that process. The monitoring team, made up of DESE and RPDC staff, will spend a great deal of time prior to and during the visit reviewing data from the district and forming hypotheses in advance. During the on-site review, the teams will look at files, observe in classrooms, and conduct comprehensive interviews with teachers, administrators, parents, and students. It's important to keep in mind that the focus of these reviews is on helping districts identify strategies that will be more productive in raising student achievement in the focus area or areas selected. While it's possible noncompliance might be identified during the review, that's not the primary purpose of the visit. Improvement plans will have already been submitted to DESE as part of the self-assessment, but some changes in those plans may be required as a result of the findings from the review, and DESE and RPDC consultants will continue to follow up to ensure these plans are having the desired effect. I've already covered a lot of these timelines, but just to recap, here is a chart showing some of the timelines for major components of the cyclical review. And now Mary Corey will take over this presentation and talk a little bit about the annual process for monitoring.
Hi, I'm Mary Corey. I'm the Director of the Data Coordination Section in the Division of Special Education, and I'm going to pick up where Margaret left off. So now that we've covered the cyclical review process, I'm going to change gears a little and share some information on some of the general supervision and monitoring activities we are implementing on an annual basis. As with many of the cyclical processes, we will be using the IMACS system to gather and review information from districts. IMACS will also be available for districts to use on a voluntary basis for improvement planning and compliant self-monitoring. At DESE, we conduct periodic reviews of data to analyze where we are as a state in relation to our SPP targets, and also to look at district-level data as we make grants available, select focus monitoring districts, and track progress in districts that have been receiving various types of support from DESE. We work closely with the RPDCs in this process because they are able to provide supports to districts in their area that appear to need assistance based on these data reviews. It is important for districts to know how they are doing in relation to student performance every year, not just the MSIP year. OSEP requires that district data for SPP indicators 1 through 14 be publicly posted every year for every district. We provide a preliminary report of the data that will be publicly posted so that you can correct any data errors prior to the posting. After the correction window has closed, the special education profile is posted on the School Data and Statistics website, along with your district's APR, report cards, etc. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that the data you enter in the core data system be accurate and timely. We recently issued our first local determinations letters to all districts, so this may be a familiar topic to you. This is something new that was required of states as part of IDEA 2004. States will be rated each year in accordance with the categories shown on this slide. If a state is rated as a state that needs assistance or needs intervention for 2 or 3 consecutive years, OSEP is required to take some enforcement action. Missouri received its first determination from OSEP this past summer. We were rated as needs assistance, which is where most of the other states were also rated. Just as OSEP must rate states, IDEA 2004 also requires that states use the same 4 categories to determine the status of each district. This must be done on an annual basis. As I mentioned, we have just recently sent our first determinations letters to districts. While we must use the same 4 categories that OSEP uses for the state, the factors upon which we base our determinations do not have to be the same as OSEP uses. There are 4 required elements that we must consider, and then we may choose to include others at our discretion. Each state sets its own criteria levels. The elements that states were required to consider this year for determinations were district performance on SPP Indicator 12, which relates to transition timelines from first steps to early childhood special education, district performance on SPP Indicator 15, which is timely correction of noncompliance, district performance in regard to submission of timely and accurate data, and any audit findings. We also decided to include the optional areas of graduation and dropout rates and assessment participation and performance on the map. We chose to include these areas because of the greater emphasis on performance in the general supervision and monitoring process. As was mentioned previously, determinations are required to be made annually. The areas considered may change from year to year based on OSEP requirements and the state's decisions about priority areas of performance. We hope the determinations process will help us to be more consistent and clear in determining criteria for districts that need the most assistance through technical assistance and improvement grants, and in the application of sanctions and enforcement actions if necessary. We have provided state improvement grants to districts for several years and plan to continue doing so as long as funds are available. We usually publicize the availability of grants in the fall of each year and provide training to districts that are interested in applying for the grants. As was mentioned earlier, grants are submitted through the IMACS system, and the improvement plan is the basis for the grant application. There are 2 areas in which the state statute and regulations require the state to monitor districts on an annual basis. These 2 areas are discipline and disproportionality. The identification of districts for a review is done through a data review. If a district is identifying as having disproportionate representation, significant disproportionality, or a discrepancy in discipline incidents between students with disabilities and all other students, then a review of the district's policies, procedures, and practices is conducted. This may be done through a self-assessment, desk review, or an on-site review. In the case of significant disproportionality and discipline, districts identified as falling in one of these categories will be required to reserve 15% of their Part B federal funds to provide early intervening services, with an emphasis on the groups affected by the disproportionality or discipline issues identified. The timelines for the various annual processes are shown on this slide. Now we're back to another puzzle piece. IDEA 2004 contains a section that lists fairly explicit requirements for state agencies in regard to the use of activities for improvement of student performance, correction of noncompliance, and the application of incentives and sanctions for agencies within the state that are responsible for providing services to students with disabilities. We have talked about many of these things over the course of this training, but the next few slides will cover in more detail the various things that we have available to districts in the areas of improvement planning, technical assistance for corrective action planning, and the enforcement actions that are delineated in the state regulations should they become necessary. Let's get the unpleasant stuff out of the way first. The state plan references a set of enforcement actions that the state must impose whenever a district is unwilling or unable to meet the provisions of the IDEA, including progress toward meeting the targets in the state performance plan. This slide shows the various actions that are listed in the state plan. As you can see, they are progressive in nature, starting out with the state advising the district of resources that are available to assist them, moving to the requirement of a corrective action or improvement plan, directing the use of funds, and finally, withholding or initiating actions to recover funds. Obviously, the more serious actions would only be taken after other options had been exhausted, and we would anticipate that withholding or recovering of funds would happen very infrequently. For the most part, we prefer to be proactive in our assistance to districts to enable them to meet the requirements of the IDEA and to show progress in performance for students with disabilities. For that reason, the division has put in place a number of tools for districts to use. Generally, all of our tools that we provide for districts fall into the puzzle piece entitled Targeted Technical Assistance and Professional Development. Districts with identified noncompliance and with areas of performance in need of improvement are offered targeted technical assistance and professional development from the department. There are a number of tools that the department has developed and is in the process of developing to assist districts. This slide lists a number of the tools that the department has available to districts to assist them in correcting noncompliance and improving the performance of students with disabilities. We will cover these in more detail. The division supports a number of positions at the regional professional development centers. These staff are available to provide professional development and targeted technical assistance to districts in their region. The improvement consultants provide professional development and technical assistance to districts in the areas of instructional improvement and improvement planning. The compliance consultants work with districts to help them understand and effectively implement IDEA compliance requirements and to develop and implement corrective action plans to ensure that any identified noncompliance is corrected within 12 months. The regional positive behavior supports consultants work with districts to implement a system of school-wide positive behavior supports, and the blindness skills specialists work with students, parents, and districts to provide direct services, evaluations, training, and technical assistance to address the needs of blind and visually impaired students. To locate the special education consultants in your region, go to the website that is shown on the screen. The State Performance Plan Information Support System is a searchable database that contains the latest evidence-based resources about special education outcome indicators such as graduation, dropout, and assessment proficiency. It provides current information about a variety of special education results areas. It is intended to assist with enhancing the knowledge base of results teams and to enrich planning activities to improve outcome data. The system will be available this fall, so watch the division webpage and the special education listservs for more information. The Division of Special Education, as well as the RPDCs, have a number of professional development offerings that are available to districts. The special education consultants can also tailor trainings to meet the needs of individual districts. One training that I'd like to point out is the improvement planning trainings, which covers the development of a good improvement plan, including the scoring guide that will be used to evaluate the plans submitted as a part of the self-assessment or grant application. The Division of Special Education provides a support center called Project Access that provides information, training, and technical assistance to schools and families working with children with autism. Project Access is located in Springfield on the campus of Missouri State University, but it serves the entire state. To learn more about the services that Project Access provides or to contact them, visit the website listed on the screen. DESE works collaboratively with the MU Center for PBIS and regional professional development centers to promote school-wide PBS across the state. To date, there are 413 implementing schools in Missouri. School-wide PBS describes a proactive approach that addresses systems, data, and practices. The primary objectives of school-wide PBS include, first, an active administrator, a common discipline approach, clear expectations, a system for adults to support those expectations or reinforce appropriate behaviors, a system for adults to consistently address inappropriate behaviors, and the use of data. DESE also provides resources to assist school districts and teachers in the area of post-secondary transition. Each RPDC region has a trained transition specialist who is available to provide technical assistance in this area. In addition, DESE has entered into a partnership with the Kansas University Transition Coalition to collaborate in the area of post-secondary transition training. The Transition Coalition is funded by OSEP and provides up-to-date information and technical assistance to DESE. Currently, there is a state interagency team which has come together to pool services and to collaborate on methods of promoting positive outcomes for adolescents with disabilities as they transition from school to post-secondary settings. The DESE, in cooperation with SuccessLink, has made available a web page for the online mentoring of teachers. This tool allows for individuals to post any questions they have, to share resources, to access professional development opportunities, and to contact each other. There is an area specifically for the sharing of lesson plans among practicing teachers. This page provides an outlet for teachers to reflect with one another in a community of practice format. This is a good resource for your staff, including special education teachers, in that lesson plans are available and PD offerings are posted in addition to the community of practice. Anyone seeking a certification as a special education administrator in the state of Missouri must have 2 years of mentoring. This mentoring may be provided through the Administrative Mentoring Program. The Administrative Mentoring Program is part of a partnership developed through a group of stakeholders and professional organizations such as the Missouri School Board Association, Higher Education, RPDCs, the Missouri Center for Career Development, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It is designed as a comprehensive 2-year mentoring program for new school leaders. The first year is a total of 40 contact hours, 24 of which is direct mentoring, 8 hours of orientation, and 4 hours of mid-year follow-up. Year 2 has an additional 22 hours of mentoring, which involves direct one-to-one contact and 4 half-day meetings. The program facilitates collegiality, collaboration, and peer support for the new leader. Mentoring assists with the development of a professional development plan, a school improvement plan, and the performance-based administrator evaluation. The program also allows the leader to assess their knowledge through the use of the Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium School Leadership Inventory. And last but not least, there's a great deal of information on the DESE website. You are encouraged to check the web frequently as new information is added regularly. In conclusion, I hope that we have provided an overview of the administration responsibilities or general supervision from a federal, state, and local perspective and have helped clarify some of the changes in the way DESE now monitors responsible public agencies. We hope that you will take advantage of the resources that are available to you as you provide oversight in your district in relation to both compliance and performance areas related to IDEA and No Child Left Behind. Thank you.